Hey, if you're new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me, and honestly, it'd make my day. If you already did, thank you so much. Oh, and by the way, if you like listening to fan fiction, check out my other channel. The link's in the description.
Chimera Luffy by mellra. What if Luffy ate a different devil's fruit as a child? Not just any fruit, but the most powerful of the Zoan fruits, the Chimera fruit. It is a legendary Zoan fruit that allows the user to take on the forms of any Zoan fruit users, as well as a true form as the mythical Chimera. How will this change the course of the One Piece world? Pairing most likely Luffy/Boa Hancock, adios.
Chapter 9. It has been a couple days since the group had left the Baratie, in search of their absent crew members. Yosaku and Sanji were near the front of the ship and resting there as Luffy jumped around like a little kid hopped up on sugar. Finally, Sanji yelled at Luffy to calm down. Still excited, he came over to sit at the very front of the boat and turned to Yosaku. "So, are we getting close to where Nami is? You know, the island?" Suddenly, Yosaku slammed his hand down on his knee, and got their attention. Pointing an accusing finger at him, he yelled out, "You're way too naive and way too young. Don't you get it? Don't you realize every second that passes brings us closer to the infamous Arlong?" Yosaku spoke to Sanji and Luffy that, due to Nami's suspicious behavior being connected to their copy of Arlong's wanted poster, he and Johnny suspected that there had to be a connection between them. Of course, Luffy and Sanji didn't seem at all concerned as Luffy asked for food. Yosaku looked ready to fall over at how clueless they were and went on to yell about everything he knew about Arlong. But Sanji was starting to swoon at the idea of mermaids, and Luffy made gills appear on his neck along with a fishtail to mimic the idea, but was knocked out of it by a well-placed kick to the head courtesy of Sanji. Yosaku was getting frustrated and told them all about the 7 warlords and mentioned Mihawk and a member who was also a fishman and just how dangerous they were. "Arlong has taken control of 20 towns since coming to the East Blue," Yosaku said with fear in his voice. "His strength easily surpasses anyone you've encountered, including Don Krieg. He's devastating." But Sanji couldn't understand why Nami would go after him by herself, which Yosaku responded that she was trying to get his bounty, with Sanji now fantasying about her being a mermaid. Sanji then went to get food done as Luffy said they would worry about it when they got there. But as the three were sitting down to really enjoy their food, there was a rumble beneath them. Suddenly, what sounded like a moo came from beneath the waves. The sea rose up on the side of the boat, and through the giant wave were a pair of horns. Sanji looked overboard to see a giant sea cow rising up out of the sea. He had a big round nose with a gold nose ring, cow-esque face and horns. Green spots throughout his body, with a great big seal-like body. Yosaku screamed in panic as Luffy and Sanji looked at it in mild curiosity. Luffy, wanting to know what the creature wanted, dived into the water, and suddenly another giant sea cow erupted from the water, startling everyone present. Yosaku screamed while foaming at the mouth before Sanji calmed down and pointed out the second sea monster. Unlike the first monstrous cow though, this one had black spots on its body, as well as a highly familiar scar under the eye and straw hat resting on the top of his head. The two creatures seemed to be talking to each other for a minute or two, the soft moos being the only thing the two humans could make out. Suddenly though, the black-spotted sea cow's eyes went white with rage and it gave a devastating headbutt to the first one, sending it flying back into the sea with tears of pain streaming from its eyes. The straw-hatted one suddenly turned back into Luffy, who landed gracefully on the railing of the ship before turning back to where he sent the cow flying, screaming out, "Bad sea cow, stay away from our food," as the sea cow mooed in anger and pain. Sanji told him off for that and went over to where the sea cow had swam to. He went to try to feed him, but as soon as it opened his mouth, Sanji kicked it so hard that he was thrown backwards into the sea. "What the crap are you doing, you jerk?" Yosaku bellowed at him furiously. "He was gonna eat me with the plate. What could I do?" Sanji asked casually, one leg up on the side of the boat, clearly waiting for it to come back up. The beast roared in fury, falling towards them. But Sanji ran up the mast and kicked him so hard in the neck that it hit the ocean, out cold. And to add insult to injury, Sanji and Luffy sat back down at the table to finish their food. "You guys are insane," Yosaku whispered, staring at them with admiration and horror. Would have been a waste of good food, Sanji said causally. Soon enough, the boys finished their meal and tied a rope around the cow's horns once he woke up tearfully. Onwards cow! Luffy cried out, and a terrified sea cow set off. Soon they were almost flying across the water as the cow pulled them. Only 15 minutes later they spotted land in the distance. Luffy jumped to the bow of the ship and enjoyed the ride, yelling out that he could see Arlong Park from here to the other two. The building, several stories high and Arlong's Jolly Roger at the top, was conspicuously placed at the coast to show that they had no fear of the law, and where the pool on the outside was linked to the outer seas with a pair of steel gates that kept it closed. Luffy yelled excitedly from the front and yelled at the large cow to pick up the pace. "I feel sorry for it," Yosaku said with his hand on his chin. Sanji's kick must have really taken its toll. The monstrous cow suddenly began to turn away from Arlong Park and headed more to the right of it. "Not that way," Luffy yelled as he pointed back to the building. "Your other left, to the building, stupid." The cow ignored him and kept going in the wrong direction as Luffy continued to laugh in excitement as they headed straight for the shoreline. The cow then crashed into the shore with such force that when the sea cow hit, it knocked itself out and launched the little boat right into the air so that it was sent soaring across the island. "Oh, it's almost like we're flying," Luffy exclaimed happily. "We are flying, you moron," Sanji yelled as he and Yosaku clung on. "No, we're falling," Yosaku screamed. Luffy gave a scream of delight as they descended into the forest and started to slide across the ground like a skate would on ice. Landing successful, Luffy cried happily. But Luffy suddenly stopped laughing and was shouting out, "Hey Zoro!" The swordsman was standing there staring at them with a gaping mouth. The boat crashed into him, but the pain didn't last long however as they finally burst through the trees, over some wetlands, and they finally crashed right into a high cliff, destroying the boat. Eventually, they tried to get out of the wreckage. As the smoke and dust of the crash disappeared, Luffy's voice was calling out, "Awesome, we're here guys." After dusting off his hat, he was standing up and looking around eagerly as a muffled voice beneath the boards. "What the heck?" Zoro forced the boards off him, screaming out at them all, "Were you doing?" "What do you mean?" Luffy asked innocently as he stood up. Sanji was still sitting on a crate, also a mess, but didn't seem to have moved from his seat. Yosaku on the other hand was in the background, his legs up in the air as the rest of him was buried in the debris. "We're here to pick up Nami, duh," Luffy went on as if it was obvious. "How come you haven't found her yet?" He paused and thought as if he just remembered something. "Oh yeah, and what about Usopp and Johnny?" But then Zoro's eyes suddenly widened as the mention of Usopp. "Usopp," he exclaimed as he stood up. "Oh no, come on. We gotta hurry." He started to run off. "Why? What's wrong?" Luffy asked after him. "That idiot was caught by Arlong," he explained quickly. "We gotta hurry before they kill him." "He's already dead," a familiar voice stated for them. Jumping at the voice, they looked up in time to see Johnny slowly coming towards them. He was looking tired and out of breath as tears fell from his eyes. "What?" Zoro exclaimed as he came towards them. "We're too late," Johnny continued numbly as he fell to his knees in front of them. "Big bro Usopp is dead." Johnny punched the ground bitterly and cried out, "Nami murdered him." "You can't be serious," Yosaku cried out. But it came furious, shouting out, "That's a lie." "Yeah, it's true," Johnny exclaimed as he fell back to the ground and sat cross-legged. "She was a traitor all along. She's been winning Arlong's favor so she could have the treasure buried in Kokoyashi village all for herself." He slammed his hand on the ground. "That woman's just a cold-hearted killer. She won't stop till she gets what she wants. Nami had us fooled the entire." But Luffy wouldn't hear any more of it. He charged again and screamed out that Johnny was a liar as he grabbed him by his collar and shook him so violently that he even let his hat fall off. "Say another word and you'll regret it." "Easy Luffy, this has nothing to do with Johnny," Zoro said in a calm voice. Johnny turned his head. "Go on, believe whatever you want. But I know what I saw. Nami killed Big Bro Usopp." "Shut your mouth," Luffy yelled as he shook Johnny again, refusing to believe anything he said. His pupils had taken on a slit, feral appearance. Never in a million years would Nami kill Usopp. She wouldn't do that to her friends. But I saw it," Johnny stammered out as Luffy looked like he was ready to throw a punch. But then another familiar voice spoke up in a contemptuous way. What was that about friends, Luffy? They looked up to see Nami was standing on the road. She had changed into a green-spotted shirt and was now sporting a tattoo on her shoulder of a saw-nosed shark turned to the left with the tail curving inward. Around the shark is a semi-oval with 3 curves emitting from it. She stood there with her staff in her hands, arms folded, and staring at them all as if they were strangers who were bugging her. Nami! Luffy exclaimed in surprise as he dropped Johnny, calming down almost at once, and his appearance went back to normal. She didn't answer for a moment as her eyes narrowed coldly, and they all had their eyes widen in surprise. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice bored, as if she couldn't care less for the answer. What are we doing here? You're our friend, Luffy said in surprise. We came to get you. He picked up his hat, as she just jeered at him. What a pest, she said. Nami, Luffy questioned, wondering as she spoke in the same cold voice. Friends, huh? Don't make me laugh. You're just pathetic enough to deserve each other, she said with a sneer that made her look quite unlike herself. Damn you. You killed him. I watched you do it, Johnny yelled angrily, pointing a shaking finger at her, and now, big bro Usopp is gone. Yep, that's right. So why don't you kill me, get your revenge? Nami said without batting an eye. What? Gasped Johnny, who seemed stunned that she answered him so causally. Word to the wise, fellas, she said sarcastically, because of your friend's stupidity. She looked to Zoro and rolled her eyes and explained. Arlong is preparing to kill Zoro along with his entire crew. And I don't care about how monstrously strong you guys think you are. You're no match for the real monsters. She played with the staff on her shoulder, and that was when they all noticed the thick bandage around her hand. I promise you, you stay on this island, you will die. So you have a choice to make between life and death. Nami finally finished as Zoro was now growling angrily at her. Sanji on the other hand was looking love-struck once again and cried out, her heartless face is so hot. He waved his arms excitedly as he swooned. Hi Nami, it's me Sanji, let's run away together. Can it, Romeo? This isn't the time or place for that, Zoro yelled in annoyance at him. Excuse me, Sanji challenged. Love is like a hurricane. So back off. But Zoro was no longer listening as he turned his back to him and looked directly at Nami, something that ticked him off. Hey, look at me when I'm talking to you. He was ignored as Zoro demanded to know where Usopp was. With the fishes, she answered, and some of the crew shivered at that. Dang it! He yelled as he pulled out his one sword, cut the crap. He looked ready to attack her, but Sanji stood in the way and Zoro had to dodge the kick aimed at his face. How sad, a swordsman attacking a lady, he asked him coldly. Idiot, Zoro growled at Sanji, can't you see what's happening here? You're starting to tick me off. Sanji just laughed. If someone stopped me that easily, I'd be mad too. What? Zoro demanded hotly, you should watch your mouth. I'll say whatever I want, jerkwad, Sanji growled right back, and it looked like they were going to have a fight as Yosaku was now trying to get them to stop from fighting. Big bros, we're all in this together, okay? He yelled, this is no time to fight. Your pal's right, Nami agreed darkly, now quit your bickering and leave while you still can. You outsiders have no right to butt into this island's affairs. Don't you get it yet? The only reason I got close to you idiots was so that I could rob you of everything you had. But now that you're broke, it looks like your dream's dead. So go. Take your ship, go on. Find a navigator dumb enough to join you and go to the Grand Line. Continue on your quest to find the One Piece or whatever, she went on before she pointed her staff at them all. Just leave here. You're an eyesore. Johnny and Yosaku growled furiously at her, looking like they wanted to attack. Convinced that she had scared them away, Nami sighed and her eyes were now being hidden by her bangs as she told them all goodbye. But there, her voice had changed. It was no longer cold or scolding. It was sad. Luffy just looked at her with a blank stare. Nami, he said softly. For a few more seconds he stood there before he closed his eyes and fell back onto the ground. Big bro Luffy, Johnny exclaimed in surprise. Sleepy, Luffy stated. Sleep, Johnny exclaimed in disbelief. Right now, in the middle of the road? Yosaku questioned him. Well, I'm pretty tired, Luffy answered coolly before he yawned. I'm not gonna butt in their affairs, not interested. But I'm not leaving either. Night. Yosaku's jaw fell open, unable to believe what he was hearing. Big bro, Johnny stuttered, and even Zoro face-palmed himself at those words. Nami seemed to snap at this. She lost all coldness in her expression and she was now shaking with rage, and she finally screamed out, "Whatever, just go ahead and die." And without a backward glance she turned and went running away as fast as she could, as if afraid to stay near them any longer. When Luffy awoke to the yelling of Sanji and Zoro, he gave a shout of surprise as he rushed to Usopp, who was both alive and a mess. His face was smashed in from both sides as if he got stuck between two boulders, and blood was dripping down from his mouth and crooked nose. "Usopp," he screamed out, shaking him a little. "Did Nami do all this to you?" Luffy shouted, his eyes wide as he continued to shake him. Sanji answered by pointing to Zoro and explained, "Sorry, Zoro, and I did that." "No, you did," Zoro disagreed darkly. Usopp was slowly coming to and had to focus hard on Luffy. "Luffy, you're here now." "Yep, sure am," Luffy answered, sounding truly relieved that Usopp wasn't dead. "I'm here too." "Hi there," Sanji greeted, and Usopp seemed to have instantly recovered as he stood up and began yelling, "One of these days I'll kill you." "Oh, you just made a full recovery," Sanji said, greatly impressed as he clapped him on the shoulder. "Shut up," he yelled, knocking his hand away and looking ready to go into a shouting match before Zoro reminded them of something. "Oh, and by the way, we kinda heard you were dead. Killed by Nami," he stated causally, as if they had been told that he went out to the store instead of getting killed. Usopp blinked, as if remembering that as well. "Stupid Johnny," Luffy growled, getting up. He was sprouting nonsense that entire time. "Well," Usopp stated, his anger gone and looking thoughtful, "in a way, it is the truth." Blinking in surprise they looked at him. "But I'm alive," he went on frowning, "'cause yo'd my life." They looked completely lost as he explained everything. The fishmen had captured him and were going to kill him, but he made things worse when he asked Nami for help, which made the fishmen suspicious of her. He then used a smoke star to try to escape, but Nami intercepted him and announced that she would kill him herself. However, instead, she stabbed her own hand to make it look like she killed him before she kicked him into the ocean so that he could swim away. When they told him that Johnny said that he saw the whole thing, Usopp supposed that Johnny must have been watching from a safe distance and was tricked like the fishmen. "So that's it," Usopp said, finishing up telling them, "That's how Nami pretended to kill me and make sure I could escape from Arlong Park." He looked up at them and finished, "Looks to me like she's got some sorta hidden motive for hanging out with a bunch of renegade fishmen." "Fine," Zoro said, his arms still folded, "What next? Are we gonna destroy Arlong Park?" But Usopp was waving his hands around in front of them, trying to get their attention before they did something they'd regret. "Whoa, hang on just a second," he said loudly, "don't you think we better find out what's going on with Nami first?" Suddenly, another voice spoke up, "It's no use either way." Looking up, the group saw a young woman was there with short, light purple hair and an even tan skin. Her right arm and chest were heavily tattooed, very similar to Nami's, but she was giving them all a dark and stern look. "No matter what you guys do, Arlong's rule won't come to an end," she informed them. "Nijiko!" Usopp exclaimed in surprise. "Who's she?" Luffy questioned him. "Nami's big sister," Usopp stated. Sanji was already smitten as he swooned. "What? Nami's sister? No wonder she's so hot." "What do you mean that it's no use?" Zoro questioned her. "Just trust me. Don't get yourselves involved here," Nijiko said bluntly, and for those who haven't met her could tell that she was just as stubborn and strong-willed as her little sister. "And leave poor Nami alone. I'll explain the situation." "Situation?" Sanji repeated in confusion. Usopp was now giving her his complete attention. "Do you mean that you can tell us why she joined up with Arlong's group?" he asked. "Yeah," Nijiko admitted, folding her arms. "And if that doesn't get you to leave, I don't know what will." "I'll pass," Luffy said as he walked past Nijiko, and Usopp called for him to wait. But Luffy barely paid attention. "I don't care about her past." Even as Sanji called out to know where he was going, he just kept going. "For a walk," he answered coolly. "A walk?" Usopp yelled after him. "Do you mean you're not gonna listen to this?" "Nope," he answered back before leaving the area. The Chimera boy walked for a while until he ended up on the edge of the village. But suddenly he saw a group of Marines closely following a man covered in scars and a spinning pinwheel on his hat. Luffy stopped walking and watched them walk past him. Luffy watched after them for a while when he said to himself, "That pinwheel is so cool." Soon, Luffy was leaning his back up against a tree and staring up at the sky with a thoughtful expression. "A pinwheel, huh?" whispered Luffy's voice and brought them back to the matter at hand. When they looked, he blinked before he suddenly smiled to himself. "I just thought of a new move." But all too soon there was a commotion not too far away, and soon there was a gathering of people with the man called Genzo calling out for a doctor. "Genzo, what is it?" A man with a white coat and sunglasses yelled as he came running over, and she stared at him as well. "Nijiko's been shot," Genzo explained as he and Nami gently lowered a body to the ground. When Genzo explained, the villagers were all horrified. "The Marines?" the doctor repeated in disbelief. As Luffy spotted Nami and got up to head towards her. Her face was hidden by her hair and she was shaking hard with her teeth grounded together. As he got nearer, her sister's head was lying in her lap and she was holding her very gently. "Nijiko?" the doctor asked as he checked her. I'm alright," Nijiko whispered back through gritted teeth. "Arlong has been working with those damn Marines," Genzo told them all, and the doctor looked up at him in outrage. "He's been lying to Nami for the last 8 years. He explained, he never intended to honor their agreement at all." "That monster!" a villager yelled out furiously, and soon there were shouts that were filled with anger and shock. "Oh, no," a woman whispered, horrified at the thought, "that means." "That scoundrel, he lied to our Nami," someone else shouted. But Nami just carefully moved Nijiko's head from her lap as she got up, her fingers curling into tight fists. "Nami," the doctor whispered as she stood there. "Hey Nami," Luffy greeted happily, waving as he came up behind her. "What's up? Need help with anything?" Instead of answering, she turned and glared at him so fiercely that the smile was wiped off his face. Her eyes weren't the cold ones she had seen before. They were full of rage that seemed to burn a hole in whatever she stared at. "Why are you still here?" she screamed at him as she grabbed him by the front of his shirt and pulled up to her face and continued to yell into his fearful face. "Stay out of my business, just get away from our island." Tears were beginning to burn and she then threw him down to the ground as she went running off before she lost all control. Luffy picked himself up from the ground and went towards a nearby tree and leaned up against it much like before. He was looking deeply annoyed as he muttered darkly, "What's her problem?" And here he sounded like a little boy would when faced with a girl on the playground who didn't want to play with him. Luffy continued to lean against the tree as the other 3 crewmates arrived together. All of them were close together so that they could see what was going on, but out of the way so that they couldn't be seen. Here, what looked like the entire village was out holding weapons, mostly things like clubs and homemade spears that were knives tied to staffs. There wasn't even a gun among them as they all gathered around, with Genzo cheering them on to take up arms. 8 long years ago, Genzo told the townspeople, "We promised we wouldn't live our lives in vain. No matter the pain and humiliation we had to endure under Arlong, we swore we would fight the long fight so that Nami could meet their demands. But they lied," he shouted out, getting them all riled up. "They never intended to keep their end of the deal. Instead they stole our only chance at freedom. So now," his eyes were bloodshot as he finally called out, "we should make those filthy fishmen pay for the years they manipulated a kind young girl. Am I right?" "Yeah. Let's do this," someone yelled out. "We've always been ready to fight those monsters," someone else yelled. "Time to show those lousy, stinkin' fishmen what we're made of." More shouts came and they were all ready to go. The 4 straw hats were all watching calmly. They looked like they wanted to join in, but something seemed to be holding them back. But what that was became clear when they heard someone shouting for them to stop. Looking up the road, they spotted Nami coming towards them with a big forced smile. But all present could tell she was fighting back tears as she came towards them. "Calm down. It's not that much money. I can make it back in no time. I'll take care of it, don't worry. It'll be easy this time, I'm used to it, I'll be fine," Nami said, still in that fake confident voice that fooled no one. "Just relax, it'll be okay." "Hey, it's nothing compared to back then," she came in front of them. "Come on everyone, I'm perfectly fine." The straw hats each felt as if their insides were shriveling up at how hard she was trying. It was clear that she was still in denial. Just trying to stop the people she loved so much from getting themselves killed. But as he walked to her and embraced her tightly, She stood there frozen as tears fell from his eyes. "You've done enough," he said softly but firmly. "You have to know that there's no point now. You struggled so hard, carrying our lives on your back this whole time. I can only imagine that joining them must have been more painful than getting stabbed in the heart. You fought very well." "Genzo," Nami whispered in a broken voice as she also started to cry. Genzo pulled away, his hand firmly on her shoulder before he said, "Set yourself free from this village." Nami looked horrified at those words and she cried out, unable to believe what he was saying, "Genzo." "Nami, do it," Nijiko encouraged, now wearing a heavy bandage around her shoulder and arm. "What? Nijiko?" Nami yelled as she looked around for some support, but it was clear from the rest of their faces that the entire town agreed. Nijiko gave her a brave look, no fear in her face as she said, "You're an exceptional young woman, and you have a dream. Everyone, listen," Nami yelled desperately, still trying to stop them. "I won't let you go," and to some surprise, she pulled out a knife and pointed it at them with shaking hands. "Just stay right there, I'm not going to let anyone else get hurt by these monsters." Her eyes were pleading as she told them, "You'll all die." "We know that," Genzo told her as he grabbed hold of the knife and gripped it so hard that he was starting to bleed. She looked startled at that as the doctor also spoke up in a grim way, "Nami, it's no use, we've made up our minds." Still crying, she shook her head, not wanting to do it, but Genzo wasn't taking no for an answer. "Get out of the way," he finally yelled, and she backed off, startled as he pulled out his sword and yelled to the people behind him, "Move out. We may not win, but we will give him hell," the doctor added, and without anyone showing any fear they charged off, past Nami, and heading towards Arlong Park. Nami just stood there, not moving as they ran past her before the knife fell from her limp hand and she fell to her knees. The young thief was shaking as she glared at the mark on her arm and dug her nails into it so hard that it looked like she might have ripped her own skin off. Tears fell as she stared at it and her eyes widened as she finally snapped. She hated that disgusting mark with so much loathing and detest, and she couldn't stand to look at it anymore. And the tears of pure, uncovered feelings were smearing her face and falling fast as she grabbed the knife again, and to some of the Straw Hat's horror, she began to stab her arm. With each stab with the knife she screamed out the venomous name of the pirate who robbed her of her family and her dreams, the one who had given her so much hopelessness and hatred. She kept going and probably would have gone on until she either bled to death, or simply severed her entire arm. But then it stopped. Luffy had come over and grabbed hold of Nami's wrist and stopped her from another stab. She didn't move for a second before she slowly turned to see who it was. Luffy's face was blank, his eyes hidden by the shadow of his hat, but also letting her know that he wasn't going to let her hurt herself like this anymore. "Luffy," she whispered softly as her hand went limp a second time and she seemed to lose all strength as she let the blood-soaked knife fall onto the road. "What do you want?" Nami demanded in a choked-up voice. "You don't know anything about this. You don't know what has been happening on this island for the past 8 years. "Nope, I don't," Luffy answered honestly. She was shaking as her hands gripped handfuls of dirt as she cried softly. "This has nothing to do with you," she said louder. "I told you to leave this place." "Yep, you sure did," Luffy said, without any doubt. "So leave," Nami yelled as she threw a handful of dirt behind her. And with every word she threw more dirt, now desperate to get him to leave. "I told you to leave. Get out of here. Get out of here now. Go away. Go. Go. But she finally ran out of steam and openly cried out, sobbing and no longer trying to hold herself back as she let out all the feelings she kept inside for those 8 miserable years. Luffy didn't react at all as he watched, just standing there as she finally said the words that he had been waiting to say. At the end of her rope, she whispered, "Luffy." She looked back, tears in her eyes. "Help me," she finally begged. For a moment, Luffy didn't do anything, but then he silently took off his straw hat and placed it on her head, and for a moment the tears stopped flowing as he turned and walked a few steps away. "Of course," he answered, "that's what friends do." He suddenly stopped and took a deep breath before he screamed out at the top of his lungs, "He's gonna p-p-p-p-p-a-y-y-y-y-y-y-y-y." His words echoed around them and they could all feel the determination in that tone. He was going to clobber Arlongs even if it killed him. "Luffy," Nami said, her hand to her face as the tears continued to fall again. Only this time they were tears of happiness when she noticed the other three waiting for orders, all of them ready to fight. "Let's go," Luffy ordered. They all looked up. "Right," they said, and they left Nami there, not speaking a word to what they were going to do, but she didn't need it as she sobbed openly, her hand still on the straw hat. The four were all side by side as they walked along, no one speaking a word as they marched along the road. They were ready to fight for each other merely for the sake of defending a single friend as they got nearer to the gate. Thankfully, the villagers hadn't even made it past that point. Johnny and Yosaku were there, both looking severely beat up. When they neared the villagers, Luffy told them all to step aside, and they parted almost at once without a word. Zoro smirked wider as they walked past them all. As they stared in disbelief, it was worth it just to see the looks on their faces. Johnny and Yosaku moved aside respectfully as they got to the door. "Take them out, big bros," Yosaku cheered on. "Show them no mercy," Johnny added, holding up a fist and grinning. Luffy didn't even smile, as he cracked his knuckles and held up his own fist. "Oh, don't worry, I intend to." Before they knew it, he pulled his fist back and punched the door enough times to make it seem as if a bomb went off as the front gate was smashed apart and exploded. Through the rubble, they could see fishmen of all shapes and types staring at them. And there, sitting in a lawn chair, was Arlong. Arlong was large and muscular. He was a light blue saw shark fish man, and his nose proved that for its saw-like shape. His black hair sprouted from the back of his neck and reached down past his shoulders, but they could also make out a shark's fin on his back, and the gills on both the sides of his neck. Sporting the tattoo of the Sun Pirates on the left side of his chest, and the identical mark that he had given Nami was on his arm. His eyes were wide in shock as he looked at him. "What the?" "Now, which one of you is Arlong?" Luffy asked threateningly, holding up his fist and glaring at each one of them, daring them to speak. The fishmen all glared at him, all of them outraged that they had come here on their turf. Once the shock was over, Arlong leaned back in the chair, not believing that he was worth the trouble. "Arlong?" he repeated darkly. "Well, that just so happens that I'm Arlong." Luffy walked to them, his head held up high and without a fear in the world as he marched in. However, Arlong seemed to be different from the other fishmen. He was calm and relaxed, but there was something dangerous in him that seemed to earn the respect of the rest of the crew. Not sure why he thought he deserved it. "Good," Luffy said as he gave him an empty look. "I'm Luffy." "Luffy?" Arlong repeated, obviously not recognizing the name, and clearly wondering just what he was doing here. "What are you supposed to be?" "A pirate, Luff." "Hold it right there," one of the fishmen said as he and another attempted to cut Luffy off. "Where do you think you're going?" "You want to talk to the boss?" the other asked. "Well, you gotta talk to us first, get it?" They smirked evilly as they put their hands on his shoulders, but Luffy banged their heads together and knocked them out as he told them to all move it. The other fishmen looked startled at that as he walked right up to Arlong. "So what does a pirate want with me?" Arlong asked causally, though there was a hint of irritation in his tone. Luffy stopped in front of Arlong. He glared at him for just a moment longer before he seized his wrist and threw it back, and by the time he swung it back, he sucker punched Arlong so hard that he was launched from his chair and hit the ground, rolling over several times before was smashed through the wall. As Arlong pushed himself from the rubble, everyone was staring, slack jaw, at Luffy. "Who the heck are you?" Arlong demanded furiously. Luffy's face was filled with nothing but fury, his face making look like some kind of monster as steam actually came out of his nose. "That's for making our navigator cry," he yelled at him. Sanji came running up behind Luffy. After this declaration of war, the fishmen started to attack Luffy, but the cook easily took them all out with a few kicks. "Back off. You're out of your league," Sanji yelled, kicking their asses, and walked on to stand next to Luffy so that he could scold him for going in by himself, which Luffy responded not to worry about him, and that he could take care of these guys on his own. "You fool," Sanji said in annoyance. "I never said anything about being worried, I just don't want you hogging all the actions." "Oh," Luffy said in understanding. "Well," Usopp said nervously, also coming up, "I just want to let you guys know that I don't mind it if you hog it all." Zoro came up and rolled his eyes. "I see that you're raring to go, as usual." As soon as he saw him, an octopus fish man named Hachi cried out in anger that Zoro tricked him before. But soon Hachi screamed in fear when he saw that Usopp was alive and a ray fishman, who was named Kurubi, snarled that Nami was a traitor. Arlong began to laugh and sent waves of cold down the villagers' spines. A pirate? Of course, Arlong said, highly amused. This is all starting to make sense now. You've been after Nami this whole time. He burst out laughing again, louder than ever. The girl is mine and I'm not giving her up. Hachi also laughed as he walked up confidently. A bunch of idiots like you aren't worth Arlong's time, he declared. We know how to deal with you. And he blew through his long mouth like a trumpet. Suddenly, the giant sea cow appeared from the waves, still sporting a giant, swollen lump on its head. Hachi then greeted him as Momu. It leaned forward to see what he wanted, but it stopped dead as soon as it saw Luffy and Sanji there. Oh, look who's back, Luffy said, folding his arms. Seems he's a friend of the fishmen, Sanji nodded in agreement. Momu was now crying as he saw them and mooing softly to himself. Momu turned and was about to leave, still crying as Hachi yelled after him to come back. But the sea cow didn't stop until Arlong told it to. Just a few words from him had apparently scared him enough to want to attack, too bad for him that Luffy was ready for it. Luffy stuck his legs firmly into the ground and transformed his arms until they resembled the tentacles of an octopus. He then used them to grab Momu's horns, showing off his powers. As everyone else freaked out, Zoro yelled at Sanji and Usopp to get back as Luffy yelled out, time for something new. And with his great strength, he was actually able to pick up Momu and was spinning him around, just like a giant pinwheel. Everything in their path, fishmen and the building behind them, was either being taken out or destroyed. By the time that he was finished, there was only Arlong, Hachi, and 2 other fishmen who were left standing while the front of Arlong Park was smashed to pieces. But Luffy focused only on Momu. In the end, he was finally able to throw the sea cow as far away as he could from them while the rest of Arlong's crew lay out cold all around them. Everyone was staring at him in shock. Once he caught his breath and transformed his arms back to normal, Luffy was yelling out, "Alright, that's it, Arlong. I'm done playing games with you. I didn't come here to beat down all your cronies. I came here to teach you a lesson." He pointed at him in a challenging way and yelled, "So step up." They looked to Arlong. Though he was still smiling, his eyes were now angry. "Oh, I will, don't worry. Actually, I was just thinking about how painfully I'll end your life." He said this in what sounded like a purr, but they weren't sure Luffy heard this as the other 3 Straw Hats gathered around him and told him off for that stunt. "That was the worst plan ever," Sanji yelled, kicking his head. "Yeah, were you trying to kill all of us too?" Usopp yelled in his ear. The citizens behind them, however, were amazed and were cheering them on. They even heard the doctor scream out, "I just can't believe there's a human who can throw that giant monster." "What are you doing?" Usopp screamed with bloodshot eyes as Luffy was now trying to get his feet out of the ground. "Are you ruining something else?" Luffy just looked down at his feet in polite confusion. "How dare you hurt our brothers?" Hachi demanded, waving his 6 arms around crazily. "Very well," Kurubi added. "It seems like we must join in on this fight. Now you'll get an education on the inferiority of your species." Chu, the remaining fishman with the long lips, who was named Chu, spoke up. "Oh, really?" Zoro smirked. "I'd like to see that." Arlong chuckled to himself as Kurubi and Chu both declared that they'd take them out for him. "Please let us kill these weaklings," Hachi yelled. "Alright." Arlong answered agreeably, "They're all yours." Sanji and Zoro were both looking confident. However, Luffy was looking to the others and said a little nervously, "Guys? There's something I should tell you." But just as Sanji mentioned the best way to cook octopus, Hachi attacked them with an inkjet, squirting black ink at them. Though the other 3 were able to dodge it, Luffy stayed behind and was quickly doused with ink from head to toe. Because of that, he was now blinded, and Zoro was yelling at him to why he didn't dodge it. Hachi then picked up a large chunk of the building that Luffy had destroyed when he threw around Momu, and turned back to Luffy, his attention all too clear. Usopp was screaming for him to run, but then came the sad truth. Luffy couldn't run, his feet were stuck. "But you're the one who stuck them into the ground in the first place," Usopp yelled. Zoro smacked himself in the face, frustrated. Thankfully, when Hachi threw the broken stone on top of him, Sanji stepped in and destroyed it with a single kick. "You're such a pain," he hissed in annoyance as Luffy cheered him on. But then he smirked again as he confessed, Looks like I picked one hell of an idiot to be my captain. We all did, Zoro added in light amusement. Sanji added, though in truth, our idiot captain is far better than a gang who prey on a lady. A lady, huh? Karubi asked skeptically. Huh? You rush into certain death for one lousy girl? I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Sanji glared at him. Lousy girl? He repeated, and they could hear the anger in his voice. If you insult Nami one more time, I can promise you'll go from fishman to fish sticks. He took out his cigarette and said threateningly, got that? Karubi didn't look concerned nor the least bit impressed. Your skills are quite exceptional, he admitted after a minute, for a human. But I must admit chivalry from a pirate seems just a little fake. Sanji sneered back at him as he admitted smugly, I'm dead good at what I do. He said as he put the cigarette band. I guarantee that there's nothing fake about my desire to help a beautiful lady in need. Sanji and Karubi faced off as Usopp tried to pull Luffy's feet out, as the monkey-brained captain started picking his nose. Hachi picked up more stone and was determined to go after him. But Zoro was one step ahead of him. He pointed his sword threateningly at him, taunting Hachi to come after him instead. It worked. Furious Hachi yelled out, "You're Zoro? I forgot." He threw his stone at him, which Zoro dodged easily as he finished yelling, "You can't get away tricking me." "That stuff's old news, octopus man," Zoro said, holding up the white blade. "I personally don't care what reasons you have for wanting to kill me, the situation has changed. You see, the tables have turned." Holding his blade and carefully unsheathing it so that no one could miss the gleaming blade. "You're not the hunters anymore. Understand? Now it's you fish freaks who are being hunted." "Luffy!" Usopp screamed out at his moron of a captain as he just realized something. "Use your powers to transform your legs. That way they'll become unstuck," he explained. Luffy bopped his fist into the palm of his other hand and you could literally see the light bulb go off over his head. With a minute of concentration, Luffy's legs seemed to increase in mass and become grayish like that of an elephant or a rhino's, and the resulting pressure cracked the pavement around his legs, allowing him to easily pull his now human legs out. Usopp cheered but then noticed the last fishman, Chu, who had killing Usopp in his sights. However, Usopp went running off past all the citizens so that Chu was distracted for a moment. Once Chu realized that they were all there, he was planning on killing them all as well, but Usopp sent an exploding star at him from a safe distance away. "Did you think that it would be easy?" Usopp challenged him. "You're dealing with ME now." "Enough," Chu yelled, losing his cool completely, and went charging after him. "I'm going to get rid of you right now." As they watched them go running off, Genzo was asking who he was. "Brave one minute and cowardly the next," the doctor said, confused. "He's a baffling man." Arlong finally got up from where he sat and walked towards them. "You morons are a pathetic sight to behold," he growled, now sounding ticked off. "I'm sick of watching this, so get out of my way." "But sir," Karubi said quickly, "there's no need for you to go on a rampage, think of Arlong Park." "Don't worry," Arlong said, "I know. I'll make sure this will be over quick." Luffy charged at the approaching fishman and his arms became scaled as he balled his hand into a fist. Going for a clothesline, Luffy cried out, "Lizard lariat." However, Arlong simply opened his mouth wide and bit into Luffy's arm, causing him to cry out in pain. Fortunately for Luffy, the hard scales on his arm prevented a majority of the damage. The worst of it was a few small lines of blood under some broken scales. Growling like an animal, Luffy used his other arm to punch the evil pirate across the face. Arlong cried out as the rough scales grazed his face, but like with Luffy, his rough skin prevented a majority of the damage. "You stupid human!" Arlong raged as he grabbed Luffy by the head with both hands and prepared to slam his face with a rising knee. Thinking fast, a hard shell started to coat the Chimera pirate's forehead, blocking the blow. "Phew, I'm glad Hercules beetles have such hard heads." Luffy sighed in relief, confident that blow would have definitely hurt. His relief didn't last long, however, as he gave a yelp when Arlong tried to spear him with his saw-like nose. Gritting his teeth, Luffy shouted out, "Let's see how you like it," as his nose suddenly gained the long horn of a rhino. "Rhino rapier," he cried as he used the horn to stab Arlong right in the shoulder. The shark gave a cry of pain before he gritted his sharp teeth and pulled Luffy out of his shoulder. "Curse you! Let's see how well you can fly," Arlong screamed in rage. Grabbing Luffy by the head, Arlong got into a pitcher's stance and threw the animal man with all his monstrous strength. Luffy cried out as he was flung far into the air. He sailed out of Arlong Park and was far out over the open water before he was able to slow down enough to transform into a seahawk and started to fly back towards the island. Unfortunately, due to how far he was flung and his own bad sense of direction, it still took Luffy a good 15 minutes before the park was back in his sights. When he flew to where he started off at, a bad sight greeted him. It was a mess, the whole battlefield was mostly destroyed, and Arlong was on his feet, holding a wounded Zoro by the throat. Suddenly something was sent flying high in the sky, and Luffy's voice was screaming out, "I'm back." Luffy saved Zoro by switching places with him and actually throwing him off into the distance. Luffy, he was now launching several attacks against Arlong. They seemed to be inefficient against him, though Luffy claimed it was just warm-up. Arlong pulling himself from the side of the building that Luffy knocked him through. "What a bunch of fools," he hissed menacingly. "You think you can actually beat me? You were better off flying over the ocean." "No, I don't think so," Luffy answered back, still stretching out. "I like it down here, yep." Arlong glared up at him before he snarled, "Do you not understand my anger?" He then got up on his feet. "I saw my brothers crushed like worms. You'll realize soon enough. You should have quit fighting long ago." Luffy, Usopp cried from a hole in the wall and they were surprised to see him there with blood dripping down from his face. "I got your back, pal." "If he loses," Sanji's voice said out and they looked up to see him soaking wet, and leaning up against the wall with Genzo and Nejico. 1. He was trying to light a wet match before he just gave up. "Then we'll all," he flicked the match away, "die." "Yeah," Genzo agreed softly as they watched the match go flying off, almost as if in slow motion, "We will." "If that happens," Nejico also added softly, "it's the end of the East Blue too." After a few minutes of silence, Arlong finally spoke. "Do you know what the biggest difference between you and me is?" he asked conceitedly. "The nose?" guessed Luffy, and as a joke he turned his into that of a shark's, too. "The jaw," Luffy then suggested, baring his now sharp teeth before then held up his hand. "Webbing," as webbing grew between them. Arlong's eyes turned white in rage. "Species!" he screamed and he lunged forward to try and bite him, but Luffy easily dodged it. Again and again Arlong tried to bite, like a wild animal. But Luffy moved back. They went at it until Arlong had finally grabbed hold of his head and slammed him against a pillar. He would have bitten him here, but Luffy shrunk into a mouse that got out of the way so that Arlong bit the pillar, and shattered it into pieces. Luffy snuck away from the collapsing building. Arlong turned back to sneer at him as if he just proved a valid point. "You see?" he asked him mockingly, "this is the inherent power of fishmen. While you may be able to look like a fishman, you're but a pale imitation. I feel sorry for you humans for having been created with such limited powers." He slowly walked towards him, still taunting him the whole time. "We've been on a different level since the beginning of time. You're inferior, it only makes sense for you to bow before us." He stopped and stood before him as he proclaimed, "You're so weak. Your presence on this planet is deplorable. Don't you think your time has come to an end?" Arlong demanded again. He chuckled, as if he told a funny joke. "I'll show you the real difference between you and I." Luffy just smiled as he turned back to human. "Sure," he told him pleasantly, "go ahead. There's no way I'm losing to a big fish, because I'm gonna be king of the pirates." Arlong picked up a piece of the stone pillar and tossed ball in his hands. "King of the pirates, don't be foolish. A puny human like you couldn't possibly conquer the Grand Line. You can't even crush a pillar with your jaws." And like that he crushed the rock with little effort. "Yeah, so what?" demanded Luffy. He then went and broke through the stone with his fist. "Stop your bragging, you aren't that awesome. Besides, smashing stone with your teeth's not that smart," Luffy added, holding up a fist. "That's right. You're the best big bro. Tell him like it is," Yosaku cheered on in the back. "Yeah," yelled Johnny, also agreeing, "what idiot bites a rock anyway?" Veins stood out on Arlong's neck. "Fools," he yelled out furiously, knowing that he was being mocked. "That's not the point. Every member of the human race is ignorant and weak." Arlong pointed at Luffy and demanded, "What good are you if you can't even pull yourself out of the water?" He then flew at him for another bite as Luffy dodged it and was able to grab hold of a couple swords that lay discarded. As a matter of fact, Luffy said, pulling the swords back and then getting right into Arlong's face, "I'm worthless without my friends to help me out." Luffy chuckled as he held out the swords and took everyone by surprise, thinking that he knew how to use them as he swung and attacked. But he wasn't really using them, just swinging them around, much like how Zoro did when completely losing it against Mihawk. Arlong effortlessly broke the swords. But it turns out that it was a ruse, with Arlong overconfident over destroying the swords. Luffy delivered a powerful blow, shattering his teeth. Luffy stood up and thought it all over for a moment. "You're right. I don't know how to use a sword, you bastard," he yelled after the brief pause. "I'm a terrible sailor. I definitely can't cook, and I can't even lie. Without my friends to help me, I would have been dead a long time ago." Arlong chuckled from where he laid his hand over the place where Luffy struck. "So you fully admit how pathetic you are. You may be a fool," he said as he sat up, "but you're certainly honest. How much your crew feel, tolerating this idiocy day in and day out? I bet they're sick of it. But that makes me wonder why they tried so desperately to save their half-wit leader," Arlong finished. Luffy glared at him as Arlong held his hand to his mouth, still to his broken teeth. "Someone like you doesn't deserve a ship or a crew. What good is a helpless whelp of a captain to them?" Arlong finished. "What can you possibly do?" "I can clobber you," Luffy responded confidently. Usopp and the rest of villagers cheered him on as Nami smiled. Even Sanji said irritably, "Well, get to it, you numbskull. Cheer all you want, but it won't change a thing," Arlong shouted out, and within seconds he regrew his teeth. Luffy gasped out. "He's got new teeth?" he said in shock. "I'm a shark," Arlong reminded him. "New teeth will grow one after the other. And with each set, I will grow stronger and stronger." Within seconds, his teeth had regrown and, using this, he pulled his teeth out to create handheld castanet weapons for each hand. And when he attacked, they thought the worse for a minute as he laughed hysterically at each attack, one after another. However, it took him some time for him to realize that Luffy used one of his crew as a human shield the whole time. Enraged, Arlong hollered at such a dirty tactic and screamed about how he dared to use his own crewmate as a shield. "What are you talking about?" Luffy asked, as if he was being scolded by his parents for something that someone else did. "You're the one who attacked me, don't you remember?" "Don't move a muscle," Arlong warned, clinking the teeth together. "Animal boy." Luffy thought it over before he said, "Say, now that's an idea." Again Luffy was forced to dodge it before he was able to get in another kick. When he came back up though, his body was much bulkier as his skin took on a bluish sheen complete with gills, webbed digits, and a small dorsal fin. Luffy grinned, showing rows of razor teeth similar to Arlong's. "Let's see who's got the bigger bite," the shark boy declared as he rushed at the enemy fishman. The two got into a grappling contest for a few minutes before Luffy saw his opening. Rearing his head back, the shark-like man was able to sink his teeth into Arlong's side, causing him to yell in pain. Snarling like a mad dog, Arlong was able to get Luffy's arm inside his mouth. "Big bro's gonna get his arm bitten off," Yosaku screamed and Nami looked horrified, but to everyone's surprise, Luffy reached up and grabbed Arlong's hair. In the end, he was able to pull him down so that he could slam his foot into his head to get him to let go. They both fell to the ground exhausted, lying on their backs, both now injured. Arlong had gotten up, and quick as a flash, he jumped for the sea. Luffy also got up as he shrank back down to normal and pulled the teeth out of his side. He was already looking around just as a dark fin appeared above the water. Nami was screaming for him to look at the water. "Wow, a shark," he said eagerly, and the Straw Hat's sighed. "Really? He hadn't noticed who it was?" Usopp almost fell over and yelled, "No, that's Arlong." The fin suddenly disappeared and they were waiting for him to come out almost anxiously. Luffy got ready to dive in after him, when suddenly Arlong launched himself like a torpedo. His attack shark darts increasing speed was able to break through all solid objects. Luffy was sent flying and crashed painfully on the ground as Arlong went smashing through an upper floor of the building. Through the hole in the building, he stood there, still cocky. "Wow, I'm impressed you could dodge that," Arlong proclaimed as Luffy looked up. "Good job. But the longer you evade death, the more painful it will be." The fishman dashed down with another attack and landed like an arrow with his nose embedded in the concrete, posed there perfectly on his nose. Thankfully Luffy had been able to dodge it in time and Arlong's nose eventually broke through the solid stone. Pulling out to face Luffy, he went flying towards him again. Luffy had no time to transform into one of his quicker or sturdier forms. He narrowly missed a death shot, but there was still blood splattered. After a third failed attack, though Luffy was sent flying, Arlong dove back into the sea again. The others were all screaming for him to hide before Arlong came back out as Luffy regained his footing, but he was shaking in anger as he declared that he wasn't going to hide this time. "Stop being so stupid," Sanji yelled at him angrily. "Go run for cover before you become a target." "No way," Luffy yelled back stubbornly. "I'm not running anywhere. I'm gonna catch him and break his nose." He turned to the water and yelled, "Come on, you shark. Didn't you hear from us to go somewhere and hide?" Usopp yelled at him furiously. "You barely escaped his last attacks. One direct hit will kill you, Luffy. Listen to us, go and hide." Ignoring him, Luffy dived into the water, much to the shock and horror of the spectators. The water was still for a moment before waves started to pick up, as if something was thrashing under the surface. Bubbles came to the surface and before anyone could blink, Arlong was shooting out of the water once more like a rocket. However, he wasn't alone this time. A black dolphin, one with a curious scar under the one eye, was quickly darting after the fleeing fishman. The dolphin was suddenly right on top of Arlong and it cried out in Luffy's voice, "Dolphin Slam." With a mighty swing of his tail, Luffy was able to send Arlong flying right into the side of the main building. The wall easily shattered on impact as Luffy, now fully human, landed gracefully on the shore. Here, it was the last straw. Arlong snapped, and his eyes changed to a wild, insane look, that's similar to a monster. "Oh no," Sanji stated uneasily, "it's the same expression that a sea king makes just before they snap. He must have snapped with Luffy's last attack." "I guess the edge," Zoro said as the red veins were standing out in those cold eyes, his head swirling around wildly, trying to find him. "His eyes," Nami whispered, her hands to her face, "I've never seen them like that." "You wretched human," screamed Arlong as he grabbed hold of Luffy by the head and swung him around like a lasso before slamming him into the building. Luffy was sitting up. "Whoa, that was crazy," he said to himself. "It didn't really hurt but I can tell he's really matter." Arlong jumped towards him and then punched through the wall when Luffy hopped on cricket legs to safety. But judging how indifferent he was to this, they couldn't help but wonder if this was what Arlong had planned from the start. Now the fishman fumbled his hand around for a moment and sighed. He knew the building well enough to know exactly what he was reaching for. And when he pulled his hand out, they saw just what it was that they stared at it. It was a giant black pole with 6 saw-toothed patterned black blades, resembling a shark's saw-like teeth with a katana handle. "The saw blade!" Nami screamed. "That thing's gigantic!" Johnny screamed as Yosaku screamed in terror. With a battle cry, Arlong was now determined to end it as he jumped to the first roof with Luffy having to jump higher and higher to avoid it all. Up and up they climbed, with Arlong destroyed everything in his way. On the top floor Luffy had finally ran out of room, but then noticed the window next to him and went diving towards it, smashing through the window. Luffy came crashing through the window with Arlong screaming up that he no longer has a place to run. They were in a room that was filled with maps. Thousands of them were scattered everywhere in stacks, some of them still hanging from the ceiling as they were left to dry while there were shelves full of books and tools. Luffy was up and was now trying to catch his breath. "That was a little too close," he gasped. Arlong came walking through, stepping on the shards of the broken window and glared at Luffy, the saw-like blade still in his hand. "There's nowhere else to run," Arlong said in a low voice. "You and me, here, the highest level of Arlong Park." He grinned evilly, and they knew that he was planning something terrible. "At last, the time of your death has come." But Luffy was looking around at this place. "What is this room? Lots of paper." "This isn't just any room," Arlong explained. "This is the room where I had Nami draw all of her sea charts for me." "This is Nami's room?" Luffy questioned, now looking around with a more focused look. "These sea charts are all that she's worked on for 8 years. Arlong paused for a moment as he looked almost fondly at the maps. "Just look around you. These maps are more valuable than any amount of treasure. You see, to us fishmen, collecting data about the ocean is a simple affair. But assembling that information into a usable chart is a difficult task. That's why we needed a navigator. In fact, that's the sole reason why I'm so keen on keeping that woman in my possession. She's absolutely brilliant. The accuracy of her charts is beyond comparison. Luffy continued to blankly look around at everything, but Arlong didn't seem to be expecting an answer. She's too good for human trash like you, he went on. Her talents should be used solely to build up the mighty Arlong Empire. Arlong pointed the weapon at him, still grinning. Now listen, Nami belongs to me. Is that so? Luffy's voice suddenly said. And you're interfering in our business, Arlong said smugly. You human s. Luffy narrowed his eyes dangerously as the shark saw was now being pointed at his head. He then sneered as he said slowly and carefully so that he couldn't hope to miss his words, she's not your friend. Luffy sat there for a moment without saying anything, but then, I don't care, he answered, still staring defiantly at him. I don't care what you say, he said firmly as Arlong looked annoyed that he wasn't agreeing with him. But with his eyes not showing any signs of fear, Luffy declared loudly, because Nami is our navigator. 1. Karubi had dragged Sanji underwater in hopes of getting an advantage, but the fight ended up like in canon. 2. I would imagine for a proud fishman like Arlong, having someone like Luffy being able to mimic a fishman's appearance is a grave insult. However, he isn't as surprised by Luffy's powers as the previous villains have been, because he had seen similar things on the Grand Line. The same could be said for Buggy, but he's a cowardly idiot, so it's no wonder he was caught off guard. Because Nami is our navigator, proclaimed Luffy so loudly that his voice echoed through the room. Really? Arlong asked mockingly. You want her to navigate your pathetic little ship for you? Huh? I guess you truly have no idea what a monumental waste of talent that would be. He gestured around to the maps in the room. Look, there is no one else on the face of the planet who can draw sea charts with such accuracy and efficacy. That young lady has a gift. Luffy kept looking around as his eyes went to the desk. A small pen fell and clattered on the floor. Luffy stretched his hand over to grab it and stare at it himself. And there isn't really anything as ultimately regrettable as wasting natural talent. Staying here and drawing up charts for me is her only chance of living up to her full potential, Arlong declared, not noticing Luffy was no longer paying attention to him. But when Luffy next spoke, he said in a quiet but dark voice, this pen is stained with blood. Arlong, ignorant of the Chimera boy in front of him, was continuing to boast, in order for me to obtain world supremacy her sea charts are absolutely vital. He took his shark saw and held it to Luffy's neck so that his neck was between two of the blades. She will continue drawing her sea charts for my own ambitions. And once her charts give me full knowledge of all the world's oceans, we fishmen will be totally invincible, and the world shall kneel before us. Luffy still just sat there, holding the pen before he finally sighed. The first step is, this island, then we'll move on to the whole East Blue, Arlong continued to rant. You can never use her like me. She would be wasted on you. Luffy, who had just put the pen carefully on the floor in front of him, almost reverently. Those words had struck a nerve, and you could sense that there was something in him that was now filled with a great anger. It could even be felt in the air as Luffy very gently took hold of one of the blades on Arlong's shark saw. His head was down and his eyes were shadowed. Arlong kept smiling until it was wiped off his face. His arm was shaking slightly and he seemed to be completely confused to what was happening. Luffy's fingers tightened on the blade. He could see that he was shaking too, but from anger, not fear. Then, all of a sudden, Luffy broke the blade as easily as if it was made of glass. No, Arlong exclaimed in shock, so that he was left holding a blade with only 2 of the 6 blades left. Luffy's expression was terrifying and the fishman felt his own spirit freeze at the look. There was no trace of his usual happy-go-lucky attitude, not even the blank or usual angry look that he got when he was faced with an opponent. There was cold fury in on his face. A sense of a hidden power radiated from inside him as if there was a wildfire burning inside him. Use her, Luffy repeated in a voice that was filled with as much rage as his face. You jerk. What the hell do you take her for? Arlong just laughed as he said, she is an inferior creature, but she has risen far above her peers. If all other humans are sewer rats, then she's a feisty little kitten. After all, she is adorable. She has her place and it's here beside me. Can't you understand that? I can give her everything she needs. Arlong finished with a wide grin on his face. And all she has to do is continue to draw those marvelous charts for me, Arlong went on. But what he said next raged Luffy to the core. So, Nami will forever be my tool. No, she'll be my friend, he laughed again. Finally, Luffy had gotten back to his feet, but instead of attacking Arlong he kicked the desk right through the wall. Arlong stopped laughing and his grin was wiped off as if Luffy had kicked him. He blinked before he stared at the giant hole where they could see the desk hover in the air for a moment before it fell. Before he could register what happened, Luffy had kicked a bookshelf and one of the stacks of maps out as well. What do you think you're doing? Arlong screamed, but Luffy completely ignored him as if he couldn't hear him as he continued his destruction of the room, making sure to take out as much as he could with every kick so that the sky was filled with paper. Stop it now, Arlong screamed as he then waved what was left of his weapon at him, but Luffy easily dodged it so that Arlong ended up destroying an enormous stack of maps and he screamed, horrified at what he had done. The charts. Once he landed, Luffy then kicked another stack out. My charts, Arlong continued to yell as he watched all his plans and ambitions being destroyed before his eyes. His anger now growing out of his control. He finally pinned Luffy against a wall and held him there with his hand at his throat. Curse you! Arlong yelled, that's 8 years of work, 8 years of planning and ambition. Luffy turned his arm into a long mantis-like scythe and used the extended blade to take out more of the room and they could hear the books and papers smashing to the ground or splashing in the water below them. Enraged, Arlong snapped even further as he bit down on Luffy's neck. Now you've gone too far, Arlong yelled as blood sprayed everywhere. Luffy was growling with pain, but he didn't back down as he changed his arms into that of a monkey so that he could use the extended reach to grab Arlong by his nose behind his head and started to pull on it. You keep jabbering on about how much better fishmen are, he said loudly, stuttering a little from pain, and how much you need those sea charts. I don't understand anything about that stuff. His monkey-like hands started to bleed as he cut them on the sharp nose, but I finally figured out how to save her. With one huge heave, Luffy snapped Arlong's nose like a twig, causing the fishman to scream in pain, and as he opened his mouth to yell, he pulled his teeth out of Luffy's neck. Luffy was still on his feet, his eyes wide, looking worse than ever before. This room isn't anything but her jail cell, he declared with a hiss. There's only one way for Nami to escape. I gotta tear this place apart. Arlong glared up at him, looking ridiculous with his bent nose as Luffy suddenly grew larger and larger while his nose lengthened and he grew tusks, becoming a human-elephant hybrid. With a mighty leap, the Chimera captain was able to jump to the point where he broke through the roof and hovered for a few seconds before he started to descend. Elephant, he began, but Arlong wasn't beaten yet. You fool! Arlong yelled and was getting up. Arlong Park cannot be brought down by some inferior human. Arlong continued as grabbed hold of his nose and straightened it with a sickening cracking sound. Especially not by some animal freak like you, Sharktooth. Drill? Arlong screamed out before he jumped and began to spin like a propeller. Or even a drill, towards Luffy's falling form, his teeth bared. Luffy's eyes widened in terror, but he managed to finish the attack as he landed on the tower, cannonball. Arlong's teeth sank deeply into his side just as Luffy's heavy body came down and slammed his face to the floor. For a moment, they were there, frozen as they stared at what happened. It was almost as if time had stopped here, but then the floor began to break apart. With Luffy's trumpet-like scream echoed as the force of the attack was so great that Arlong started to cough up blood just before Luffy's body slammed him down floor after floor of Arlong Park and hit the ground with an almighty boom. As Luffy stood from where he landed, the rest of the building was starting to collapse. The walls crumbled and the roof was falling in. Luffy just didn't seem to get to the hole he made in the wall in time. The ceiling gave way and the floor broke apart as he fell through it. The noise was so loud, but then everything went dark around him as the night sky came back. But suddenly the top of the rubble was moved and Luffy burst through so that he was standing on top of the remains. He slowly shrank down back to his human form. Showing prevented a majority of the damage along with his natural resistance. No one spoke as they all stared at him. Though he didn't say a word, their eyes were all drawn to him as if he had shouted. Luffy then took a deep breath and yelled out, "Nami," he finished screaming out, "Nami, you'll always be my friend." It slowly dawned on all the crowd what just happened as they were all screaming in joy. All of them cheering and crying as well. Finally, their nightmare was over. And the cry that echoed through the village was Nami's happy tears while Johnny and Yosaku screamed out, "Big bro won." Later, back in Kokoyashi village, after a small altercation with a group of marines, an enormous party going on. The villagers were all dancing and feasting, music and laughter was in the air, and every single person here was smiling. "You moron!" The doctor snapped as Zoro was gritting his teeth and moving painfully around on the bed as Johnny and Yosaku slept in the background. Well, almost everyone was smiling. The doctor continued, "Did you think this would heal on its own? Seriously, pirates are supposed to be smarter than this?" Zoro tried to defend himself, but the doctor shoved his hand in Zoro's face to keep him still as he continued stitching. "Don't you have a doctor for this?" Just then a familiar face appeared in the window above Zoro's head, with a leg of meat in his hand, and he repeated, "Doctor? Never thought of that. Good idea." "Luffy," Zoro said in surprise. "But we need to get a musician first, right?" Luffy asked, as if making sure that he got it. "Why's that?" Zoro asked him. "'Cause pirates really like to sing," he said as if it was obvious. Zoro actually laughed at that and sounded sarcastic as he said, "That's true, but why is that first?" Luffy didn't answer, but he grinned at him before he looked up to the doctor and asked where Nami was, claiming that she wasn't in the village. "Well then," the doctor said, looking away as he thought it all over, "if she's not in the village, there's only one place she'd go." Later still, it was still a dark night around, and the only thing that had changed was that Genzo was in the more quiet location. He was on a cliff that overlooked the ocean. A bright moon was reflected in the sparkling sea below them. And there was a very simple grave raised there with a wooden cross. Genzo had poured an entire bottle of sake over it, as if the one who was buried there could enjoy it as well. It was very peaceful for a few quiet moments, but that soon ended when someone yelled out, "Where's the food?" Genzo had jumped and spun around to see who it was. Luffy was barely aware that he wasn't alone as he looked for food. "Oh, no food out here," he said to himself, sounding disappointed before he turned around and muttered something about leaving. "Wait, boy!" Genzo suddenly shouted, stopping Luffy so that he would look back, and they looked over at him. "Huh, a grave?" Luffy asked before he asked tactlessly, "Did somebody died?" Genzo turned back to look at the wooden cross and admitted to Luffy that someone did die a long time ago. "Oh, I'm sorry," Luffy said, bowing his head, though it probably would have been easier to take him seriously if he took the food out of his mouth first. "I give you to my conveniences." Luffy realized that he said it wrong and tried again. "Wait, my sincere compliments, no, my deepest," he said several times before Genzo corrected him. "My deepest condolences," he said. "Yeah, thanks," Luffy said. "Listen, boy," Genzo said, still not looking away, but his voice was very serious, "I know Nami is going away with you. She has her mind set on becoming a pirate, and that, dangerous business. And I'm fine with that, it can't be helped. But if any of you do anything to hurt her, I will kill you," Genzo said, his voice deadly serious. "We're not gonna hurt her," Luffy said to him firmly. But Genzo spun around and yelled out at the top of his lungs, "You sure?" Luffy looked startled at that before he nodded, "I'm sure." Genzo moved his cap back down so that he couldn't see his eyes, but a satisfied smile was tugging at the scarred man's lips, as if he just had a hard question answered for him. Day of departure. The 4 Straw Hats were already on the deck of the Going Merry as they began piling on crates and boxes of food and supplies. It looked like the whole island had come to say goodbye. Suddenly, Sanji had run to the side of the ship. "There she is," he screamed out, barely able to contain himself. Looking up, they saw Nami standing far along the road, and everyone was looking directly at her. Her eyes were hidden by bangs before she screamed out, "Set the sails." And suddenly she started sprinting towards them as if she was being chased by something. "I don't get it," Usopp said, watching her sprint towards them. "Why is she running?" "She said set sail," Luffy reminded him, and he jumped a little at the seriousness in his tone. "No," Genzo suddenly cried out as he Nijiko and the doctor all looked surprised at Nami. "She's planning on leaving without letting any of us thank her or say goodbye." "Set sail," Luffy yelled, and they did as Zoro pulled up the anchor. Soon they were moving away from the dock. "Wait, don't go," someone screamed, "they're leaving." "Stop." At least let us say goodbye." Nami didn't respond to any of their words as she continued to spread with the citizens trying to stop her. Genzo fought his way through to the front. "Nami," he yelled, "come back here. You can't leave this way." "So," Sanji said to Luffy, "you sure you want to let her leave like this?" "Not my decision," Luffy told him, "she does what she wants." They sailed farther and farther away, with Nami now in danger of being left behind. But they didn't need to worry. Nami started to run between them all, zigzag, diagonal, up and down. She ran past all of them all, slipping away without any trouble, thanks to her years of stealing. Once she passed the doctor and her sister, she jumped, almost flying through the air, just barely made it to the ship. "Why?" Genzo cried out as she landed on the Mary's deck. Breathing hard, she didn't move for a moment before she pulled back her shirt to show dozens of wallets and coin purses falling out. At that, they all checked their pockets and realized that she stole from each of them. Nami was pulling out some of the money. She kissed it before looking back with a smug smirk, "Thanks a bunch." The looks on each of their faces was priceless. "Why, you little brat," Genzo shouted as their jaws all dropped. Usopp whispered to Zoro darkly, "Great, she hasn't changed a bit." "I'd watch my back if I were you," Zoro agreed, giving Nami a shady look. But Luffy was laughing as Sanji gave her a thumbs up. "You lousy pickpocket," Genzo cried out, "we'll miss you." But then Genzo suddenly yelled at Luffy and got their attention. "Boy?" Luffy looked back up, as he finished by yelling, "Remember what I told you?" Luffy just smirked and gave him the thumbs up, "You got it." Nami began to scream out, waving goodbye. "Goodbye everybody, I'll miss you, take care." She then turned to the rest of the crew and said, "Now that that's over with, I say it's about time we head off to the Grand Line." Everyone cheered and started to laugh together, glad that was finally over. It was another beautiful day later and the whole crew was relaxing on the Mary's deck. Nami was stretching out on a lawn chair as Usopp sat there, mixing together some of his infamous Tabasco stars. Zoro was on the upper deck and taking a nap, and after looking around for a minute, they spotted Luffy cautiously reaching for some tangerines that had been put on the top of the cabin. Sanji came out of nowhere and kicked him so hard that he was flung backwards right into Usopp, who had some of it get splashed into his eyes. Luffy, however, was glaring up at Sanji and yelled, "Ah, come on, I just want one of them." "No," Sanji yelled, standing there in front of the trees like a bodyguard, his arms folded. "This is Nami, won't let anyone lay a finger on it." He then turned to Nami with his eyes as hearts and cried out, his arms now wide, "Nami, can you see how well I'm protecting your trees?" "Yes," she said, without turning to look at him, "you're doing very well." Soon, Nami was still going over the paper as Luffy sat up on the railing, looking hungrily up at the fruit as Usopp lay on his back with a cool cloth to his red eyes. "I only want one tangerine," Luffy whined. "Just give it here, you're so mean." He stuck his tongue at him. "No," Sanji yelled again. "Oh well," Luffy said, beaming widely, "I'm pretty happy anyway." "The world sure is a turbulent place," Nami suddenly stated, telling them what she was reading. She flipped the page and a stray piece of paper fell out. "What's that?" Luffy asked just as it fluttered to the deck and they saw what it was. Everyone gasped at what they saw and soon they were all screaming. Some of them were joyous, or horrified. Luffy jumped up and picked it up to stare at it. His eyes were as big as dinner plates as he stared at it and held it up for them all to see, laughing out proudly. "Alright guys, we're wanted criminals." Usopp leaned over to look at it. "Wanted, dead or alive, 30 million. That's a whole lot of berries," Luffy cried out, still laughing. "Check it out," Usopp cried out, pointing at it as a dreamy look came over his face. "I'll be seen all around the world." "What?" Sanji screamed out, staring at it. "They put long nose in but left me out." He was then looking all over the poster, now demanding to know where he was because he couldn't see him. Usopp pointed in the lower corner where the back of his head was and began to laugh as Sanji sat on the deck to pout. "It's the back of your head. That's not so great." Usopp giggled and said, "Ah, don't be so glum. You don't have to be a captain to get your picture on one of these things." Sanji cheered up almost at once. "Is that true?" he asked excitedly. "Yeah," Usopp said, "just work really hard." The three male Straw Hats were all celebrating and dancing as Nami looked like she wanted to crack their heads together. "Let's go to the Grand Line, men. Luffy shouted out and the other two cheered along. Yet again, you guys don't understand how grim our situation really is. Nami yelled at them before she slapped her hand to her head. This means all of our lives will be in constant danger. Soon they were back on the Mary's deck, and the five of them were all on the upper deck with Nami poring over the map and find a way to the Grand Line. We're getting closer, she informed them. We've almost made it to the Grand Line and it looks like the only way through is here, Reverse Mountain. There's not, Sanji suddenly said. From what the geezer told me that's the only place to enter. Usopp looked over at him. Well, how come? 'Cause it's really dangerous. He answered as if it was obvious, which soon led to the two arguing, again. See, the reason is, Nami began, but Luffy interrupted. I got an idea. Why don't we sail right into it? Nami looked deeply annoyed and snapped at him. Are you really that clueless? My way sounds a lot more fun, he said brightly, smiling, plus it'd be a whole lot better to dive right into it, right? Nami put her hand to her head as if she had a headache and said, talking to you drives me completely insane. First off, Luffy said, sounding more serious, we have to stop by an island. We need to pick up some meat. Need meat. Giving him an annoyed look, she pointed to a small island on the map and explained, there's a famous city on this island, known as Lougetown. Lougetown? Luffy repeated mildly, why is it famous? They got delicious meat? You know, Sanji stated, I'm surprised you love meat so much. I mean, you turn into most animals anyway? Shouldn't you be a vegetarian or something? Luffy went wide-eyed before sticking his tongue out in a yuck face and declared, no way, vegetables are gross. 1. I'm pretty sure I've heard of it before, Zoro said as he looked up at the sky, ignoring the captain and chef's developing argument on the values of vegetables. It's the city of the beginning and the end. Luffy looked confused and Nami explained, it's the town where the old king of the pirates, Gold Roger, was both born and killed. The Straw Hats were all looking at the make with new interest as Luffy asked in a hushed tone, that's where the king of the pirates died. She looked at him with a small smile. Well, yeah, let's do it, Luffy said seriously. This was the man who had the One Piece. Everything the world has to offer. I need to see where he was born and executed. Before long they were standing in a large town in what looked like the main square. Though it was wide open, it was filled with people. After agreeing to meet up later, the Straw Hats soon went their separate ways. Before long, someone in the crowd at the town's square yelled that someone was up on the execution's platform. When the other members of the crowd looked up, they could see a tall metal structure, several stories high, and starting to rust from the years of being exposed to the elements. Standing at the top, with his eyes shielded so that he could see everything, was Luffy. In the crowd someone screamed, hey, you up there? Looking down, Luffy saw that a police officer, dressed in attire very similar to Genzo was there with a loudspeaker. Get down from there, immediately. But why? Luffy shouted back, like a child who had been told that he had to go to bed and didn't understand why he couldn't stay up later. You are standing on an execution platform that belongs to the world government, the officer yelled. Now, get down from there right now. Fine. I'll come down. Luffy yelled down agreeably. But first you have to say the magic word and smile too. I'm not playing, I will arrest you if you don't come down, the officer yelled, and he truly sounded annoyed. But before he could make good on his threat, someone came out from the crowd with a colossal iron mace over her shoulder before she hit the man so hard that he was out as soon as he hit the ground. She was a truly beautiful woman that was slim, well endowed, with dark green eyes before his brown, and full ruby red lips. But the most noticeable thing about her was her silky looking skin that looked so soft. Ahem. What was I saying? Oh yeah. The woman spoke. Now's not the time for such trifles, she said in a sweet voice that seemed strangely familiar. The woman was looking up to Luffy and cooed out, long time no see, Luffy. I've been looking for you. Apparently Luffy didn't recognize her as he looked down with a confused look on his face. When she noticed this, the woman sighed. Now that's just rude, she said. You mean to tell me that you, of all people, this face? Forgot? I'm pretty sure we haven't even met, Luffy said in confusion. Who are you? I'll never forget you. You're the first man who ever truly struck me, the woman said fondly, causing the other people around them to scowl up at Luffy, outraged that he had done something to this girl. What? I never hit you. Luffy yelled incredulity. looking a little lost as to why everyone was glaring at him. "When you struck me with your powerful fist," she answered, her hand over her stomach. "It felt good." Luffy looked most uncomfortable at this and his eyes were darting around, as if hoping for a way to escape. "Listen up, boys. Who is the most beautiful person on these seas?" the woman suddenly asked the crowd. "That would be you." Everyone in the crowd yelled as they got down on their knees and held their arms out to her. "That's correct," the now highly familiar-sounding woman said with a smirk, holding out her arm. "I am quite breathtaking, aren't I? There isn't a man alive that won't crumble before my beauty. But I prefer strong men, like you." Looking back to the platform, she cooed out, "I'm gonna make you all mine, Luffy. Just wait." Luffy shouted out, now sounding the thought, "Gross, no way. Just who the heck are you?" "You still haven't figured it out," she exclaimed in annoyance, losing her patience. Several officers came running to the square with their weapons and telling the woman to put her mace down and come with them. "I'm placing you under arrest for assaulting a police captain," another officer yelled before he turned up to Luffy and shouted out, "As for you up there, get off that platform." "Hold on, who did you say you were arresting?" the woman asked, as if she just wanted to make sure she heard right. We're arresting you," the officer stuttered, taken in by her beauty as she batted her eyelashes at him. "Are you really going to arrest me?" she asked sweetly, smiling as hearts now appeared in the officer's eyes, causing them to start saying that they couldn't arrest her because she's too beautiful. "I don't give a crap," another yelled, though he was now looking close to proclaiming undying love as well. "Arrest her." But before they could act, a large cannonball came flying from behind them and it hit the fountain so that it ended up blowing it apart in large chunks when a large part of the fountain flew at the woman, but as it hit, it slid right off her as if it had been a giant bar of soap and went flying off near Luffy's direction but moved in time. "Aw man, that's weird," Luffy exclaimed loudly as everyone stared at her. "That little stunt was dangerous, you know," the woman asked, sounding just a little irritated as she turned her attention to a group of people who had come from the direction of the cannonball, each of them wearing a dark cloak to cover themselves. "I'm flashily sorry," the one out front said softly. "But that smooth skin of yours is unharmed, of course. So there's no need to worry, fairest Alvida." "Alvida?" Luffy repeated to himself, as he finally made the connection, or maybe not. "I don't see Alvida." "Don't be so dense, you nimwit," the woman yelled angrily, "I'm Alvida." "WHAAAA?" the collective fans of One Piece screamed out upon reading this. "You sure?" Luffy asked, "'cause I don't think you're her." Alvida smiled. "I guessed I really did change after eating the fruit called." She removed her heart cloak to fully reveal her new body to them all, and get the whole picture to how much she had changed. Smooth fruit. No attack can hurt my skin because it slides right off. Unfortunately, a lowly fruit could not improve on my already stunning good looks. Alvida sighed in disappointment as she touched her cheek. "One big change you may have noticed was that I lost my freckles." Sure, that must be it," Luffy whispered, though it was clear that he didn't believe a word he said as he continued to look around for a way to get away from her. "After becoming a whole new person," Alvida went on, "I decided to join forces with someone who shared my goal of finding you." She then finally gestured to the cloaked men. Here, the cloaked man laughed insanely as he and his crew threw off the cloaks, revealing to be Buggy the Clown, and his whole circus was back. "Now that I've flashily made my entrance, time for the real star of the show," he screamed out and pointed up at Luffy. "Monkey D. Luffy, ever since the day you sent me flying, I've been obsessed with exacting my revenge on you. That alone led to me finally finding my crew. My travels are an epic saga. I went to hell, found friendship. I even lost parts of my body. I call this tale, Tiny Buggy's Great Adventure. The first thing that happened was, why the hell am I telling you a story?" Luffy stared blankly at Buggy. "Don't know." Now, he folded his arms as he said, "What was your name again? Buggy? Buggy? Boohee? Baggy? Aw, I know," he said proudly, "it's Buffoon?" "Buffoon?" Buggy screamed, enraged. "You got a lot of nerve, you bratty animal. And now Buggy the Clown is gonna make you pay for that." "Hey, that's Buggy the Clown," one of the people yelled in fear. And at the mention of pirates, all the people there turned and began to try and run, wanting nothing more than to get away from the square as fast as they could. But the Buggy pirates seemed to be prepared for this as they each pulled out guns and swords, making sure that they wouldn't move. "You people flashily stay where you are," Buggy proclaimed to them all. "I want every single one of you to see exactly how scary I can be." "Oh yeah," Luffy yelled proudly, having just remembered Buggy's real name. "Buggy, right?" "You mean you just now remembered it?" Buggy screamed. Too late. With Luffy distracted, the man who fought Zoro on the unicycle, Kabaji, appeared behind him and slammed a large metal and wood board down on top of him to trap him so that he was pinned in the stalks that held his head and hands there. "Hey," Luffy questioned in surprise, looking around up at Kabaji. "What gives?" "Long time no see, animal freak," Kabaji greeted with a scolding tone as he sat on the stalk and asked how Zoro was doing. "Good shot, Kabaji," Buggy praised as he began to laugh and call out to everyone. "To all of my followers, hundreds of billions of them around the world, we will now begin the most flashily public execution. You're trapped, Monkey D. Luffy. You can't move so much as an inch." Luffy attempted to pull his head out of the board, but he couldn't pull his head out of the hole, and it wasn't easy for him to do so while he was being held like this. He honestly couldn't move at all. Suddenly he felt weaker for some reason and could no longer feel like he could transform into one of his animal forms to escape. 2. "Tell me, Straw Hat," Buggy yelled up at him as he laughed. "Feel honored? You'll die in the same place as the king of the pirates?" Again, despite his weakness, Luffy was trying to move as a wind began to pick up and dark clouds were being blown over them so that the entire square was cast in shadows. And perhaps it was just the trace of electrical energy in the air that caused it, but there was also a strong sense that something big was going to happen here was building with each minute. Ignoring this, Buggy started speaking again like an announcer. "Pirate Monkey D. Luffy of the Straw Hats will be flashily executed for the crime of being stuck up and making me angry," Buggy yelled as he lifted his arms, suddenly standing beside the trapped Luffy. At his words, all the pirates around them were screaming in celebration, shooting off guns and jumping as if a great show was about to take place. "Now live it up, flashily," Buggy shouted as his men all cheered at that. Luffy was looking down at them excitedly. "Oh boy, I've never seen an execution." "Well, you're about to, kid," Buggy informed him with a dark chuckle in his voice. Luffy blinked at that and looked up as he slowly processed what he said. "What?" he screamed out in horror. "Stop joking." "It's no joke," Buggy screamed as Luffy was now trying to desperately pull himself free and call for help. "I even got a little bit of sea stone just for you so you won't turn into something like a rat and escape. It wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. Now," he said as he turned away from the struggling Straw Hat. "Alright," Buggy yelled to the crowd as Luffy continued to try pull his head free. "I hereby flashily begin the festivities of this public execution." Luffy finally stopped struggling and was now lying there with a pout on his face. "I'm so sorry. Really I am, please spare my life," he said in a droning voice, and it sounded as if Nami forced him to apologize for breaking something instead of pleading for his life. It couldn't have been any clearer to them that he didn't mean a word to what he said. "Why would I spare your life?" Buggy bellowed in frustration. "This is what happens when you go against us," Kabaji commented, moving back down to the ground so that he could watch with the others. Alvida sighed a little regretfully. "I guess this is it for the man I had my eye on." Buggy held up a long sword and looked down at Luffy as he stated, "You've got quite a big audience here today. Saint, say a few words before you die?" Luffy continued to sit there with a grumpy look on his face, even as Buggy stepped on his head. "Ah, cat got your tongue?" Buggy asked, still taunting him. "That's all right. Stay quiet or say a few words. It doesn't matter, you're still gonna die." Luffy lay there for a moment before he took a deep breath. Just as a great wind swept over them all, he bellowed out at the top of his lungs, so that the words seemed to echo all around them. "Listen, I'm the man who will be king of the pirates." There was stunned silence all around them as the crowd stared at him in disbelief. Yet at the same time it was as if they could feel a strange energy coming from him, as if confirming his words. Buggy, however, wasn't impressed as he grinned evilly. "We're finally getting to the best part of the show?" he asked him, looking truly pleased at what he was going to do. "Bye-bye now." Luffy had tried to pull his head out one last time, but it was clear that he was trapped here. But then Zoro's voice echoed out behind them, "Stop the execution." There they were, Zoro and Sanji had finally shown up and were now standing at the edge of the crowd as they watched on. Now, they both screamed out at Buggy, clearly warning him that they weren't playing around here. "Zoro, Sanji," Luffy yelled in relief. "Luffy, you idiot," Zoro teased, his hand resting on the two new swords hanging at his hip. "Guess all that fooling around finally caught up with ya, huh? You starting a sideshow?" Sanji added, looking around at the buggy pirates. "Or is that how you look?" "Pretty sad," he continued as he smoked. "Now, all we gotta do is drive these goons away." The citizens all screamed Zoro's name in terror and fled. Thankfully, the buggy pirates turned their full attention away from them and onto the two men. "Hey guys!" Luffy screamed again happily. "You made it here, Zoro," Buggy yelled cockily. "But you're just a little bit too late." He raised his sword over his head, ready to cut Luffy's head off, and that got their attention as they rushed in to try and take down the platform before that sword fell. Of course, that was difficult to do since the pirates were now standing in their way, with Alvida now taking control and telling them what to do. Though the two members of the monster trio were easily able to plow through these weaklings, they were outnumbered and it was taking too long already. Buggy laughed victoriously as he held his sword high as the sky continued to darken overhead. The storm was almost here. "Not even the great Zoro can stop me now. There's nothing you two can do. This is the end of your captain." Luffy's expression became terrified as he stared up at the blade as Buggy continued to laugh insanely. Zoro and Sanji were now fighting tooth and nail to reach the platform in time. They were quickly becoming more frantic and scared as they tried to force their way through. "Creep!" Sanji screamed at Buggy as the thunder roared around them. As the Straw Hats all watched the two fight to get closer, Luffy's voice from above them sounded out. "Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Nami?" They looked up to see Luffy looking up. Everyone in the square was now staring up as the fear completely left Luffy's face. Instead, he was smiling. Each of the Straw Hats felt as if they had frozen in place as they stared at him. It wasn't a forced or painful smile, but serene, as if he was truly happy. This lingering smile, Luffy truly believed he was going to die here, but he wasn't upset about it. "Sorry," Luffy went on, and he truly did sound like he meant it this time. But this time he was apologizing to his crew, not Buggy. "But, I'm dead," he informed them all. And he kept smiling even as Buggy brought his sword down on his neck. "Idiot!" Zoro as he stared up in horror. "Don't say that," Sanji yelled, now desperately kicking 5 or 6 pirates out of his way to get to them. But as the blade fell, it sparkled with electricity from the air, and with a great explosion from above them a single bolt of lightning came crashing from the dark clouds and struck the tower. The entire tower burst into blue flames and the skies opened up to the rain. In a matter of seconds, it was pouring, but the platform continued to burn, slowly bending and twisting around as it broke and landed with a crash sideways. The sound of when it hit the ground echoed throughout the square. No one said a word, no one even moved as they watched. They were all staring with their mouths open in shock at the twisted heap of metal and burnt wood. Just at that moment, Luffy had pulled himself out of the debris, his head still on and his body looking only slightly singed and dirty. Buggy wasn't so lucky, taking the brunt of the blast. He was lying on the ground and was badly burnt and out cold. 3. Like a puppy finding its owner. Luffy's straw hat dropped at his feet and Luffy picked it up to put it back on. As soon as he did, he started to laugh. A laugh that cut through the silence. "Hey, I'm still alive. That's nice." The people in the crowd hadn't recovered as quickly as they had and were all staring in stunned disbelief at what they just saw. Sanji's own mouth was open so that his cigarette fell out, but Zoro's face didn't react at all, but there was a strange contemplation expression there as he looked at Luffy coming towards them, talking about how lucky an escape that was. "That was divine intervention," Sanji suddenly declared. "Stop talking nonsense," Zoro said at once, the first one to really recover. Though still shaken up by what just happened, he grasped the seriousness of the situation as he said loudly, looking around them, "We gotta get out of this town. Our troubles are not over." It looked like he was right, because at that moment, a small army of Marines came charging out from all sides. It was clear that they had the entire place surrounded from the moment that the pirates began fighting each other and were now trying to round them all up. Luffy was looking ready for a fight, but Zoro grabbed him and reminded him that they had to run now. That if they didn't get back to the Merry now, they weren't going to leave at all. So, with everyone's attentions on each other, The three turned and went running down the street in the direction of the docks. As they ran through the empty streets, the rain was now coming down harder than ever before. Zoro yelled in frustration, "What the hell is up with all this rain?" "Nami was right about this storm," Sanji said loudly, trying to shield his eyes from the water with his arm so that he could see where they were going. "If we don't get back to the ship and set sail soon, then we'll be stuck here for good." On they ran, even when the Marines were right behind them. They kept going, not bothering to stop and fight. With every step they seemed to take, however, the rain seemed to become thicker and fall harder so that it was getting hard to see anything in front of them. But eventually, they spotted someone standing in their way, a young woman with short navy blue hair and a sword in her hands. "I didn't know you were Zoro, and a pirate as well." "You lied," the woman said, her head down. But then she looked up and glared at Zoro and said loudly, "You're just another liar." Zoro told her irritably, "You never asked what my name was, did you? So I never lied, did I?" The woman got angry at him and declared that she wasn't going to let him leave town with his sword. In the end, Zoro decided to stay behind and fight. The woman, Tashigi, charged ahead in anger and pull out her blade, but Zoro was more than able to hold her back. His eyes held a thoughtful expression as Sanji yelled that he shouldn't fight a girl. That got Tashigi even angrier than before and told him off for that, as Zoro told them to go on ahead. Luffy nodded, deciding to leave it all to him as he and Sanji left, with Sanji threatening to kick his ass if he hurt her. As Luffy and Sanji ran through the raging storm that suddenly appeared in Logia Town, Luffy met up with another Marine's name was Smoker, and he was the leading officer in Logia Town. He was around Zoro's height with short white hair and wore a white marine jacket that looked like it was made to look like a biker's. He had a large metal jute strapped to his back and, most curiously, had 2 cigars in his mouth with more strapped along his body. Luffy and Smoker weren't waiting around as they began to fight. But here, no matter what Luffy threw at him, none of his attacks did any good. Any attack launched at the Marine passed through him as his body turned to smoke, showing the Marine to be a devil fruit user. Luffy jumped around on cricket legs and tried multiple rapid fire kicks on Smoker. However, his attacks just ended up going right through him like smoke. The Marine then flew a smoky fist that caught Luffy in the face during one of his failed attacks, sending the young pirate crashing to the ground. "What's wrong?" Smoker challenged, had enough already. Luffy slowly go back up and tried to attack, but nothing he did worked. "This is bad," he thought frantically. "I can't think of any animal that can hurt Smoke. Fore." Smoker trapped Luffy in a cloud of smoke and slammed him to the ground, his face in the concrete and his hand on his head. "I told you," Smoker yelled at him. "You gotta go through me to get to the Grand Line. You're not worth 30 million berries. Huh, your luck's run out." But as Smoker reached for his weapon, someone stepped out of the shadows and took hold of it to prevent him from moving. The man's face was a mystery. Not only was the rain obstructing their view, but the man was wearing a long, dark green cloak that hid him completely from their view. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," the man said in a hoarse voice. Though his tone carried no trace of a threat, they could tell that he meant business. There was something in that voice that seemed to demand attention despite speaking so softly. "It's you," Smoker snarled almost exactly as Robin spoke. "Hey, what's going on?" demanded Luffy with a muffled voice, hard for him to speak with his face to the ground. "Who's that?" "The most wanted man in the world. Dragon the Revolutionary." "How nice," Smoker said to him. "Now the government can have your head." Dragon didn't speak for a moment, but then he went on in that same hoarse voice, "The world is still waiting for our answer." Just then the whole area was surrounded with an eerie green light and a great wind came rushing out of nowhere, a wind that was so strong that it was as if they were in the middle of a maelstrom. Luffy screamed as he was sent flying back, falling backwards onto soft grass. After recovering, Luffy was soon standing on the Going Merry, but it was still raining hard and the storm raged around him. Fierce gales and heavy rains and battered the ship something awful as Nami was shouting out instructions as they just left Logia Town. "Feels like she's gonna capsize," Luffy yelled from the front, but instead of worried, he sounded excited at the thought that they might end up drowning. "Hey look! A light!" Nami suddenly screamed out and they looked up to see a bright light burning in the distance, point the way through the storm. "Is that a lighthouse?" Usopp screamed over the noise of the storm as he hung on to the mast to keep himself from slipping. "The Grand Line is just out ahead," Luffy repeated in awe, his eyes bright as he grinned at the lighthouse. Nami smiled just as brightly as she looked to him, and she was as excited as he was here. Zoro smirked and Sanji grinned wildly, giving them a thumbs up. Luffy and Nami were grinning at each other as Luffy held onto his hat to keep it from being blown off. Sanji then yelled out, "Okay then, I think we should say something to mark the occasion." "Good idea," Usopp exclaimed, finally able to pull himself off the mast at the suggestion as Luffy yelled in agreement to that idea. Sanji rolled out a large barrel on the upper deck and the 5 crewmates stepped around it. Each one had an excited gleam in their eye, because they all knew that this was the first time of them fulfilling their dreams. They smiled at the barrel, as if each one was thinking the same thing as the others. Sanji stepped up first and put his foot on the top of the barrel. "I'm going to the Grand Line to find all blue." Following suit, Luffy also put his foot up and proclaimed that he was going to become the king of the pirates. One by one, they all put a foot up and told each other their dreams. The reason they set out to sea with each other in the first place was for these reasons. Zoro and Nami both proclaimed their reasons for being here and looked to Usopp, who stood there thinking, as if he didn't know what to say, but then he quickly put his foot up and said, "I guess I'm going to be a brave warrior of the sea." Though the 5 of them held their feet there for only a few seconds, it felt so much longer. They looked at the barrel that held their goals and hopes, each one smiling through the rain. At this moment, there was no fear or hesitation in any of them. There was no turning back for them even if they wanted to. They all knew what they wanted, and it was here that they decided that they were going to go to the ends of the world if that's what it took to get it, and no matter what happened, they were going to do it together. And now, Luffy yelled as they all raised their legs high, and brought them down to smash the barrel, to the Grand Line. "Yeah!" the Straw Hats shouted, with the little boat continuing on through the rough storm, following the light.